All right, let's jump straight into this explainer. We're looking at the dramatic rise and the frankly lightning-fast collapse of one of early medieval India's most glittering, yet incredibly fragile states, the Vardhana Dynasty. We're zeroing in on the mid-6th century, right after the mighty Gupta Empire bowed out. Now, a lot of folks mistake this era for a dark age of political fragmentation, but actually, it was wildly dynamic. We're talking about a time when a minor family from a small town pulled together this massive pan-North Indian hegemony, only for the whole thing to completely shatter the literal second their greatest king took his last breath. We've got a lot of ground to cover across a century of history, so here's our roadmap. First, the rise of the Vardhanas. Second, blood, betrayal, and succession. Third, building Harsha's hegemony. Fourth, inside the Vardhana state. And finally, number 5, the sudden, complete collapse. To set the stage here, get a load of this extravagant praise from the royal court poet Banabhatta. He describes Pravakara Vardhana, one of the dynasty's early kings, as a lion among the neighboring princes. Pretty epic, right? But as we're going to see, building an enduring state requires a lot more than just having a charismatic lion at the helm. You need institutions. And that is exactly where this story gets so fascinating. So, let's get into part 1, Rise of the Vardhanas, from obscure origins to regional power. Now, to really understand this period, we have to do a bit of a balancing act with our sources. It's a classic case of juxtaposing the insiders' glowing propaganda against the outsiders' on-the-ground reality. On one hand, we've got Banabhatta, the court poet who wrote the Harsha Charita. His entire job was literally to flatter his boss, so he gives us all the drama and ornate metaphors. But then we have Xuanzang. He was a Chinese Buddhist monk and pilgrim traveling through India in the 7th century. He wasn't on the royal payroll at all, he was just looking for Buddhist scriptures. So his travel records give us this wonderfully empirical, objective view of the administrative realities. Put them together, and we get the real picture. The Vardhanas, or technically the Pushyabhuti family, actually started out as pretty modest feudatory chieftains in Stun Vishwara, which is modern-day Thanesar in Haryana. They were really just minor players until that lion we mentioned earlier, Pravakara took charge. Ruling from about 580 to 605 CE, he drastically expanded their influence and started throwing around grand imperial titles like Maharaja Dhiraja, literally the Great King of Kings. And to lock in this new VIP status, he orchestrated a super strategic marriage alliance, marrying his daughter Rajashri to the king of the powerful Makari dynasty over in Kannauj. The idea was to secure their eastern flank and just guarantee peace. Well, that marriage alliance backfired spectacularly. That brings us to part 2, blood, betrayal, and succession, focusing on the crisis of 605 to 606 CE. The sheer speed of this catastrophe is honestly staggering. In 605 CE, the powerful Prabhakara falls ill and dies. While his eldest son is away fighting in the northwest, utter disaster strikes Kannauj. A rival king from Malwa murders the brother-in-law and throws the Vardhana daughter, Rajashri, into a dungeon. The eldest brother races back, takes the throne, and marches out for revenge. He actually wins his battle, but then he's treacherously murdered by yet another rival, Shashanka of Gauda. So think about this. In just a matter of months, we have a dying king, a murdered brother-in-law, a kidnapped sister, and a betrayed brother. The entire kingdom just falls into the lap of a 16-year-old boy named Harshavardhana. But against all odds, that teenager steps up, rescuing his sister from the Vindhya forests, just in time. Let's move to part 3, building Harsha's hegemony, its expansion, and its limits. Once Harsha actually secured the throne, he made a massive pivot. He shifted his capital from his ancestral home down to Kannauj. It was a brilliant move. Kannauj was perfectly positioned right on the Ganges, commanding that incredibly fertile middle region. Over the next few decades, he built this sprawling network of alliances and tributary states. He didn't just conquer, he was a master dealmaker. He allied with the king of Kamarapa way out in modern Assam just to squeeze his enemy from both sides. Before long, Harsha's authority stretched right across the Gangetic Plain, covering modern Haryana, UP, Bihar, and even parts of Bengal. But Harsha definitely had his limits. He wasn't invincible. When he tried to push his armies south across the Narmada River into the Deccan, he ran headfirst into Pulakeshin II, the powerhouse ruler of the Chalukya dynasty, and Pulakeshin absolutely crushed him. The crazy part is, we know this because Pulakeshin's court poet carved this incredibly punchy mocking pun right into stone in 634 CE. He wrote that Harshavardhana, a name which literally means the increaser of joy, had lost his Harsha, his joy, on the battlefield. Ouch. That defeat permanently established the Narmada River as a hard southern boundary for the Vardhana state. So if he was the big boss of the north, but blocked in the south, how did he actually run this massive territory? Let's crack open Part 4, Inside the Vardhana State, a House of Cards. The most crucial thing to grasp here is that Harsha was absolutely not running a tightly unified empire. It was what we call a hegemonic overlordship. Basically, it's a hub-and-spoke system. Harsha directly controlled a pretty small core territory around Kannauj. For everything else, he relied on a massive periphery of subordinate chieftains, known as samantas. These samantas kept their local autonomy, their own lands, even their own armies. They just paid tribute and showed up to fight when Harsha called them. The whole operation was entirely held together by Harsha's personal charisma and military prestige. And if you compare this to the older Gupta Empire, the structural flaw in Harsha's setup becomes glaringly obvious. The Guptas ran a highly centralized bureaucracy. They paid their officials in cash, which created loyalty to the institution of the state itself. But the Vardhana system was completely feudalized. Instead of cash, Harsha handed out land grants and regional autonomy, meaning the loyalty wasn't to the state at all. It was a personal loyalty to a charismatic king. Sure, it worked great while Harsha was alive and kicking, but it was a system virtually guaranteed to fall apart without him. So how do you fund a decentralized setup like that? According to our outside observer, Xuanzang, Harsha kept taxes relatively light and split the state revenues into 4 equal chunks: a quarter for state expenditure, a quarter for official stipends, a quarter for public works, and a massive 25% strictly for religious endowments. Harsha was huge on ostentatious religious patronage. He'd host these massive assemblies every 5 years at Prayaga, modern-day Allahabad, where he would literally give away 5 years' worth of accumulated wealth to monks, priests, ascetics, and the poor. This lavish patronage was essentially the glue holding his public image together. Though his family started out worshipping Shiva, Harsha became a massive patron of Mahayana Buddhism while still generously funding everyone else. He sponsored the legendary monastic University of Nalanda, which is exactly what drew international students like Xuanzang in the first place. And those massive almsgiving assemblies, historians actually view them as the structural precursors to today's Kumbh Mela. Combine all of this with a glittering Sanskrit court culture, and Harsha created an incredible facade. It looked like this unified golden empire, but underneath, complete administrative fragility. Which brings us to the ultimate tragedy of state building, Part 5, the sudden, complete collapse and the aftermath of 647 CE. Let's walk through the wildly chaotic international incident that went down the second Harsha died in 647 CE. After a 41-year reign, he passes away without an heir. Immediately, a minister named Arunasva usurps the throne. But this guy makes a catastrophic diplomatic blunder. He attacks a visiting Chinese envoy from the Tang Dynasty, a man named Wang Xuanzang. While Wang Xuanzang escapes into the Himalayas, recruits a combined army from Tibet and Nepal, marches right back down into the plains, utterly destroys Arunasva, and drags him back to China as a prisoner. I mean, it's a bizarre, violent episode, but it perfectly highlights the absolute political vacuum that swallowed Kannauj the minute Harsha was gone. Why did the whole thing unravel so fast? Simply put, without an heir and without an institutionalized bureaucracy to weather the storm, that entire web of personal loyalty just snapped. The state wasn't held together by government institutions, it was held together by Harsha. So the moment he died, all those samantas, those regional chieftains we talked about, they looked at the chaos in Kannauj, realized they owed zero allegiance to some random usurper, and instantly declared their own independence. Almost overnight, the Vardhana state simply vanished, and the Gangetic Plain shattered back into a mosaic of competing regional kingdoms. The dramatic arc of the Vardhanas is honestly a masterclass in the severe limits of personalist rule. Harsha built something culturally brilliant and militarily terrifying, but he built it entirely on his own individual prestige, not on lasting structures. So, as we wrap up this explainer on the glittering illusion of the Vardhana state, I want to leave you with this provocative thought. If a sprawling kingdom relies entirely on the charisma of one exceptional individual, rather than enduring institutions, can it ever truly be called an empire? Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and I'll see you in the next one.